Hello, and thank you for joining me for this panel on bioengineering for the NIH Graduate and Professional School Fair. My name is Dr. Andrea Naranjo, and I work in the Office of Intramural Training and Education at the NIH. I'm joined today by Dr. Robert Allen, Senior Associate, Regulatory Affairs at MCRA, Dr. Wilfred Chen, Gore Professor, Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Delaware, Dr. Abigail Foster, Technical Development Scientist at Genentech, and Dr. Grace Peng, Program Director, National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering at the NIH. So welcome, and thank you for joining me today. Can we start by giving a 2 to 3 minute introduction on what your job entails? And we can start with Abby.
Of course. Thank you for having us, Andrea. Again, I'm Abigail Foster. I'm at Genentech. So I work in the Department of Pharmaceutical Development, and I am part of process or pharmaceutical technical development. And at Genentech, we focus on making new medicines for a range of disease ailments. In my particular department, I'm in the formulation space. So what that means is when we focus on a new molecule or a new particular therapy, I am responsible for going through the formulation work to determine how we make that into a drug. On a day-to-day basis, I focus a lot on doing a lot of research in the lab where I explore new conditions for making these into successful therapies. In addition to that, I do a lot of research work where I focus on new materials that may be useful down the line.
Okay, so my name is Wilfred Chen. I'm a professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Delaware. So I think my job description is pretty easy to understand. I will teach at least one class per semester, and typically a graduate elective for one semester and a main undergraduate core ChemE class in the second semester. And a typical enrollment for the undergraduate class is somewhere in the 80 to 90 student range. So that semester is going to be pretty taxing in terms of having office hour, preparing for lectures. So that's the only part of what we do, because we spend the rest of our time supervising research. That's mean working with graduate students, writing proposals to raise money to conduct the research. And then you have all the additional professional outreach activity that's both related to your research, but also related to what we're doing today, which is talk to our prospective, our PhD candidates in the future on what they wanted to do moving forward. It's a very fun job, particularly now. I can still do most of my work at home. So I fully encourage everyone to think about being faculty members in the future.
I'll go next. My name is Grace Peng, and I'm a program director at the National Institutes of Health. And I am officially a government agent, and I'm responsible for spending your taxpayer dollars that Congress gives us for health research for the country. And so my job is to manage a program, and my program focuses on mathematical modeling, simulation, and analysis. And what I do is I work with researchers in the country and around the world who are interested in applying for grants to do their research, and specifically grants that are focused on modeling, analysis, and simulation. And so I get lots of research ideas, and I communicate with these investigators on figuring out what are the best ways for them to apply for research funding, and I walk them through the process. I don't organize review. There are counterparts at the NIH who organize review, but then after review, I decide on funding, and then if people are funded, I work with the investigators throughout their grant to look at their progress and see how well they're doing. If they're not funded, then I work with them again to figure out what are other ways to get funding. So that's one thing that I do. I work with there's about 3,000 program directors at the NIH, and I work with other program directors to develop other ways of developing our programs. And so a lot of my job also with the other program directors is organizing meetings and workshops and thinking about where research should go next based on our community input. And so, and then I also develop new initiatives from there. So it's a really fun job. It's different than staying in academia. It's sort of like you have a 30,000-foot view of research around the country, and in my case, biomedical engineering research. And so it's a great way to see how the field is moving overall.
Thanks. I'll introduce myself. My name is Rob Allen. Thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here. And I am a senior associate at the medical device consulting firm, MCRA, also pronounced MICRA. And I am basically a medical device regulatory professional. So generally what that means is I serve to help medical device companies communicate with the FDA and plan for getting through the FDA towards regulatory clearance or approval, which is an important process that needs to be completed to get new devices and technologies in the hands of doctors and caregivers to help patients. So what does this look like? This could be anything from advising a medical device company at a high level on the things they need to do to get through the FDA. This could be addressing very specific questions that a company might have from their own regulatory department that they can't answer on their own. Or more often than not, we regulatory affairs professionals can find ourselves writing a whole regulatory submission, so a whole 510K or PMA submission for a new medical device to be sold in the US. Day to day, I may be on the phone with a company. I may be doing a web presentation to the FDA on behalf of the company, or I may just be working on a written submission. So it's definitely a fast-paced environment, but also very exciting. A lot of communication, a lot of interpersonal skills in this kind of job. Good to be with you all.
Thank you. So next, tell me about how you become interested in bioengineering.
I'll start. I guess I went to college knowing that I'm interested in engineering because I like to fix things and put things together. And so I actually didn't really know what kind of engineering focus I'd like to focus on. And so I started out as an engineering physics major because at the time there was a lot of lasers development and I wanted to study lasers. I eventually switched over to electrical engineering and studied analog circuit design, but that's when I did an internship in the local rehab center at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and started developing projects that would be helpful to persons with disability. And so I was actually developing a pH sensor for a blind woman so she could measure the acidity in her swimming pool. And so the idea of applying engineering to help people was really interesting. So then when I went to graduate school at Northwestern, I picked Northwestern because they had many broad programs in biomedical engineering, so I could pick and choose from those programs. And so I guess I slowly became a biomedical engineer because of all the different experiences I had. And biomedical engineering is really broad too. So I would encourage you to look at all the different kinds of biomedical engineering topics and fields that there are. Thanks.
I think I can follow up there. I think my path was a little similar to Grace's. I started out, knowing I really like to fix things, figure out how things work. So I went to undergrad at Harvey Mudd, which doesn't have an engineering focus like a lot of colleges. So I knew I wanted to be an engineer. But close to the time when I was graduating and had to figure out what to do next, I remember an advisor recommending the University of Delaware to me and connecting me to some professors there. I joined the Department of Chemical Engineering, and I think what really steered me towards bioengineering in particular is meeting Millie Sullivan in the department. So Millie's group was really focused on using or understanding how the body works, understanding how we can connect biology and engineering, and in the lab space and in research, develop things that were biomimetic. And in Millie's group, I think I became particularly interested in making new materials and figuring out how these materials could interface with the body. And I continue to explore things like that through my postdoc. And I think since then I could really start calling myself a bioengineer.
Yeah, I can jump in next. So what brought me to bioengineering really was a strong interest in being on the cutting edge. I didn't want to have, at the time what I thought was a normal job. I wanted to be doing things that haven't been done before. I was interested in discovery and innovation, but also didn't really know what those things looked like. It just sounded like bioengineering was going to be where I could really do that. And I was also interested in having a healthcare focus, but I didn't want to do the whole med school thing. I wanted to be in sort of an innovative space that didn't require all that, all that intense pre-med situation. Of course, I found that bioengineering training is also quite intense, very technical, and a lot to learn. But that's kind of how I came to it. And while I was training, in mostly in my when I was in graduate school, I started gaining kind of a late found appreciation for the business side of the medical device and biotech industries, and seeing, it's not just the technology, it's not just the science that helps patients. It's also knowing what the clinical needs are, what is possible to build, and the costs and regulatory challenges that I thought were, boring things I didn't want to think about, ended up being, a major part of what I do now. And I think there's, as you're deciding what kind of work you want to do, encourage you to try to challenge yourself to think broadly and really look at big picture when you're trying to think of, things that might be helpful for society. So I'm surprised to find myself working in an office, not working in the lab, yet still making an impact in getting products and therapies to market.
So I think my path to do bioengineering is different. I think I really didn't like biology in high school because it was mostly physiology based rather than molecular. And I really didn't like biology even as an undergrad. It's not really until I get into grad school and start to talk to different faculty members and then find out my PhD advisor at that time was one of the first few chemical engineers actually doing quite a bit of molecular biology. And I thought it was interesting, different. And I think over the years, I really started to have a lot better appreciation of what biology can bring on the table, not only for human health related, you can also think about how to make contribution to energy, environmental, and I've done work in all these different areas. And I think that's what makes it so interesting is if you have the creativity and imagination, you can actually think about how to bring biology into providing solutions to all the different places.
Thank you. And I hear a little bit about your background, and Grace, you mentioned that bioengineering is a very broad field. So I'm wondering if you can comment on a little bit of your the training that you did, and just to get a sense of how many careers kind of collate into biomedical engineering.
So in terms of my background, like I said, I studied analog circuit design as well as control systems engineering and electrical engineering. And then when I went to graduate school, I was more focused on optics, actually. And for my master's thesis, I developed a confocal surgical microscope to look into a guinea pig's outer hair cells in their inner ear. And so if you think about it, I could have not predicted that would be a project, but to create the microscope on the bench and the optics was really interesting. And then for my PhD, I moved labs and studied the vestibular system, and that's the system that controls how you orientate yourself in space. And it's like your human gyroscope system. And if any parts of it doesn't work, you feel dizziness. And so that's when I got into computational modeling and developing mathematical and control systems models to study how the vestibular reflexes work. And so, and that's when I actually did some human studies, mostly on my fellow grad students and spinning them around. But also I went on to do my postdoc at Johns Hopkins to work with dizzy patients and studying their eye movement. So the combination of everything went from, circuit design to systems engineering, control systems, signal processing, modeling. It included neuroscience. So a lot of my focus became neuroscience because I was trying to understand how the brain works to control how we orientate in space. So that's how, even just thinking about my career, I've touched on so many different aspects of the field, and that's, I guess, what biomedical engineers do is you integrate knowledge from different fields to solve the problem that you're trying to solve for human beings, or creating devices for human health. So that's just an example. So thanks.
Thank you. And what skills are most valued in your field, and what stands out from a competitive candidate in your field or program?
One of the top skills for a regulatory affairs professional is communication. We talk about communication a lot when you're talking about transitioning and into the professional world, as well as getting. It's also important in the academic world as well. I guess the specifics of communication being important in regulatory affairs include basically being able to really listen hard to what's being said, especially in meetings with FDA or in meetings with a client, so a medical device company, where you're trying to figure out exactly how you can help and what the problem is. Sometimes the problem statements are unclear and you need to figure it out. And really the company is looking to you to understand what they're saying, what they're implying, and what ultimately what strategies might work. And then on the other side of communication is doing the actual communicating. It's very important to be clear and concise. In fact, many of the meetings that I'm involved in are on the permanent record. There's going to be meeting minutes, and the company might show the meeting minutes to their investors. Similarly, if you say something, if you're a little loose with your words or you're vague, representing a company, you could confuse the FDA or maybe even get them concerned about something that's off topic and not a concern. So definitely one of the top skills needed. Time management is also extremely important. There are no for many tasks, there are no extensions available. You can't graduate later if you're late on something. And many deadlines to the FDA are legally binding, and you can't give it any later than that. So knowing how long things take, being able to really accurately estimate that, being able to communicate to people how much time you need, and also being able to say no to things because maybe there's just physically not enough time to do something, and you need to be clear on that up front, or no back-to-back all-nighters can solve that problem. So I'd say those two pieces are very highly valued for a regulatory affairs professional.
I would second that. I would say clear writing, attention to detail, We write a lot of emails at the NIH, and just, making sure you communicate properly is so important. I mean, I think a lot of grad school training is communication too, and having your advisor redline all the scientific papers you write over and over and over again. I think that's the biggest training you get from graduate school that you may not get with undergraduate education, but that attention to detail and fixating on every word that's conveyed. And I also think another skill is just having self-motivation. When we interview people, we want to see the fire in their belly and see what drives them. And I guess the flip side is, as you're discovering your own interests, you should really try to figure out what interests you, what drives you. Do you like working with people all the time, or do you like to work by yourself? And that sort of thing really helps to figure out what would be a good career for you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the ability to communicate both orally and, more importantly, how to write. I mean, being a professor, you're spending 90% of your time writing, either proposal, paper, writing your lectures, writing emails, and also the ability to multitask. You have to do many different things in the same day. I mean, I have Monday meeting. I will meet with all my students on Monday for half an hour, and they work on different types of projects, right? So the ability to be able to switch back and forth is also extremely important.
I guess to add to that, one of the things that comes to mind is, scientific curiosity. I think a big thing that, has driven success for myself and a number of people I've worked with is, being really excited about the science, being really excited about connecting disparate ideas to solve big problems. I mean, one of the things that we've all talked about so far is that, coming to this point of calling ourselves bioengineers, we've gotten there from really different places. We've pulled different ideas together to solve different problems. So I think a successful candidate is someone who's going to be able to pull ideas from different folks they've met with, different people they've met with along their career path, and use it to, come up with creative ways to address, different problems that they're going to be faced with.
Perfect, thank you. And next, what are the most rewarding and challenging aspects of your job and your field?
I think for me, since I left academia, the reward I get is to see the people that I'm helping succeed. So seeing the professors get their first time funding, or trying over and over again many times, and finally getting their grant application succeed in peer review. And peer review means that having the other academics say that this is a really good idea and a good proposal, but and also following the community and watching science develop. And it's just so exciting to see, new things happening. Like the people in this panel right now are doing some really cutting edge work, and to see that evolve, from, right now we're talking about artificial intelligence, but we had artificial intelligence, many years ago, but now it's really blossoming, and people using artificial intelligence or developing synthetic biology approaches. That's also evolved from other fields. So to see that is really, really rewarding.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, for being a faculty, the PhD student you produce from your work, sometimes you're more proud of their accomplishment than your own. Your undergraduate have gone on to our either industrial career, or more importantly, go to graduate school. Maybe they have work in your lab, and some of the work inspired them to go on to do related graduate work. I think it's the human interactions and the reward you get from the human interaction. Those to me are much long lasting compared with what you get paper published. Okay, great. Then the next year you go to work on something else.
I would say for me, I was in the academic space for a while, and I think, right now, I think what I would consider to be the biggest reward is the knowledge that I'm working on things that are going to be actual therapies that touch patients. So when I get to that point of, hearing about a new drug that we've developed and it's now on the market or so on, I think it's that feeling of knowing that we're actually doing things and touching patients and reaching lives and changing lives. And, I joined my company in particular, because I really enjoy working with the people in my team. But it's interesting to work with folks and know that the company is tackling some of the big health issues that affect people in my family, affect friends, and so on. So it's a great feeling to know that there's something out there on the market that's touching other families and helping my family as well. So I think that's one of the most rewarding things for me. To talk about some of your question related to the challenges. Again, I was in the academic space for a while. I was a postdoc before I joined the company. And I think one of the biggest challenges is, getting out of that mindset of being a graduate student and a postdoc that handles every single aspect of a project, and then going to a bigger company where you start to, work and rely on, different people across the teams and different parts of the organization to tackle a big problem. So I think, I'm still in that learning stage where I'm, trying to figure out the different roles. I know Rob was talking about, interactions with the FDA and things like that. So I think that's one of the challenges, it's every one of these levels that you go through, it's figuring out what the processes are and the different stages to go through to be successful. So
Great, thank you. So I hear a lot of your background, and it's a very diverse background, but I wonder if you can expand a little bit on what are the possible fields and career paths for bioengineers, and how important is an advanced degree?
Well, I think it's great that our panel covers 4 different career options, I guess, from academia to industry to regulatory to government. And I think we all encapsulate different ways of implementing biomedical engineering. And so, what was the second part of your question?
And how important is an advanced degree?
So I think we touched upon that too. I think graduate school for me really helped me focus on thinking through a problem, a question. So with the master's, you sort of had a project sort of given to you, but you had to go through all the steps in making it successful. With a PhD, you're asked to create your own question and to determine if it's a feasible question and then carry it through. But again, it's the work with your advisor and your field to really communicate and focus on the attention to detail, creating your rig, creating your own analysis and making your project successful.
Yeah, one thing I can add to that, I mean, there's a lot of different pathways out there, and I think someone on the panel already mentioned this before, but with so many pathways out there, it's really important to explore, what types of pathways are potentially of interest to you, and also to be really honest with yourself about, what are you good at, what do you like doing, which may be different things. Hopefully you've got something that you like doing and that you're good at, and then also where are the opportunities, and by that I mean, not everyone who wants to be a rock star becomes a rock star. There are realities that everyone has to look at as far as how competitive are certain spaces, and do you really have a good shot at getting there? And sometimes you can create the answer to that. Maybe so I can give. Let me think about the best way to get to the point I'm trying to make. So there are some pathways that For example, academia is the pathway that many of us are familiar with, and some of us are in. There's a lot of things, a lot of steps you need to take, and you need to be able to do them well to become a tenure track professor, and it's a great fit for a lot of people. However, if you haven't, maybe it's not a good fit for you, and if you don't find out until 2/3 of the way through your path, you've lost a lot of time trying to build towards that, and that's time that you don't get back. And I think the other point I want to make, why is it important to kind of find what path you're interested in early? I've found that a lot of the skills I'm using now, the skills that made me marketable for the position I'm in now, I really grabbed most of those skills over the course of about 2 years. And for my particular field, an advanced degree is helpful but not essential. So that's very different from pursuing a tenure track professorship. Both paths are great for but are great for different people. And so just finding out what you want to do early, and then sort of also figuring out what qualifications do you need to get there, or what qualifications do you want to and skills and experiences do you want to keep a couple of options open. I think those are probably smart ways to go about your kind of journey through your biomedical engineering training.
Yeah, I would actually follow up and say that you should look at different professional opportunities in biomedical engineering and work backwards. Maybe you can talk to people like us and see, how did you get here? And so one of the reasons I left academia after going through everything all the way through to getting a tenure track position is I discovered while I was in the academia that I'm actually didn't enjoy teaching very much. And so if you can figure that out earlier, I would encourage you to figure out if you like teaching or not. And I actually love giving talks. Like, I give lots and lots of talks now, but I realized what I didn't like about teaching was grading people and judging people. And for that, it was not something that made me not enjoy that part of academia. And I left and came to the government. And so I'm not grading people when I'm giving talks to them. And the reviewers grade the grants. And so I'm more on the encouraging side. So that's just an example of knowing what makes you tick.
Okay, thank you. And I guess to end this panel, I have one more question. And what advice would you give someone considering a career in bioengineering?
I would say, to follow up, to sort of follow up on some of the comments that Rob and Grace just mentioned. It's really reaching out to different folks in later stages of bioengineering, people at companies, people in academia, and so on, and talking with them about how they got there. I think one of the biggest things I realized was important for me is, creating a strong network of people throughout industry, throughout academia, and folks that I could reach out to and talk about my career paths and get that kind of guidance about what to do next and what would make me a successful candidate in whatever position I wanted to pursue. So I think it's really starting to create a network, starting to reach out to folks when career panels and things like this are set up, not being afraid to reach out to folks on the panels, because a lot of these people are people who want to help. So, making a network for yourself.
And I think it's the same thing for being in academia. Sometimes I think the candidate know where to do teaching and maybe research, but there are a lot of other, university-related activities, committees, and all the different things you have to serve on. So that can take a lot of time, as well as the teaching and some of the other. And then how to you find a way to balance your family and professional life and academia is also something you have to understand and navigate. I mean, you can never anticipate how to do it before you actually get it, go in there and do it. So as Abby talking about before, talking to people who have been in the academia for a while, they should be able to tell you. And also talking to people in different types of institution, different career stages will give you a sense of how the progression will change and the expectations will be different. Because there's no one particular model that will fit every single setting. So
yeah, I really like what everyone's said to this question, and a couple of people have mentioned the importance of a network, and I totally agree with that. And I think so professional and network and a mentor network, those are I think the places where you can get sort of the highest quality, you know, information on what careers might work for you, what it feels like to be in certain positions, and also what opportunities are there. For example, the position I'm currently in came from networking. So it came from going to events, from people remembering me, and then deciding that they wanted to tell me about an opportunity before they posted it online, basically. So the network is a very I think very key thing to develop early on, and it's going to be a great tool for you to figure out what you want to do and then to be able to go out and do it.
I just want to emphasize that this is your time right now to explore, and especially if you're currently in a university setting, go visit labs, talk to grad students, talk to professors. They're all there, and everyone loves to talk about their work and their science, but ask them about what they like about what they're doing. Make connections. When I was in grad school, I would go and visit my advisor's his grad school buddies, and in their labs around the country. If I happened to take a family trip somewhere, I'd go and visit that university and visit that person's lab, and just explore as much as possible. And finally, I actually would recommend, if you could, get some experience outside the United States. Spend some time in a foreign country, live on your own. I actually participated in the IASTE program. It's an international exchange program for engineers to get training outside the United States. And I worked as an electrical engineer in a textile company. So I wasn't doing biomedical engineering, but it was an awesome experience. I was living in Switzerland, and I learned so much about myself as well as about life. And then I went to grad school. So it was just the summer between my senior year, after graduating from college, to graduate school. So, but I'm sure there's a lot of other opportunities that you can explore if you can get that experience outside the United States. I would recommend it.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to contribute to the NIH Graduate and Professional School Fair, and your answers have been very valuable. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
welcome.
Yep, glad to be here. Thanks, everyone.